Welcome to the
Club Dub Football Podcast,
where the only question is,
Does your team make it into the club?
Can he get in? No, he cannot!
Welcome to your weekly dose of NFL jibber-jabber, the Club Dub Football Podcast. Remember to follow on Twitter, Insta, and watch video shows each week on YouTube. Want to get in touch? That's easy. Message through social or email clubdubpodcast@mail.com.
Welcome, gents.
Hi, Rob.
Hi, Rob.
It's time for our second show of the week. We are absolutely moving into new territory. Although this second show has a much more familiar feel, this is our Into the Weekend Pick'em show where we look forward to the slate of games in the NFL. And maybe I'm going to be made to look very stupid, and maybe this is just a sign of overconfidence, but it does seem a slightly easier slate of games to pick winners this week. It does seem like there aren't many of the big hitters against each other, but we've been surprised before. Maybe we will be surprised again. After Tuesday's premiering recap show, PB, it's lovely to have you back in our company, but still no Aldrin. So just the three of us are going to have to make the magic happen. So without further ado, let's start throwing ourselves into the conversation around who will make it into Club Dub this week. And JB, I'm coming over to you first. Tell us your tie of the week and then break it down for us, please.
I have decided that we are going to join Al and Chris in talking about the Broncos and the Chiefs this week, because I think this is the game that immediately jumped out to me as with the most intrigue. As we record this for the moment, the AFC West is the only division with every team over 500. Yes, the AFC North has everybody at least at 500, but this is the only one with it over. And well, I know that we spend a lot of time, or I feel we spend a lot of time talking about the Chiefs, but I think the Chiefs are one of the most newsworthy teams of the season because it's just not firing and they're just not performing like the Chiefs that we've expected them to be. And I think I asked a couple of weeks ago when we get to the point of not expecting the Chiefs to be the Chiefs and when we just kind of accept that, to quote, is it Denny Green, they are who we think they are. Whereas the Broncos are kind of also a surprise, but in a completely different way. I think the Chiefs are a surprise in how inconsistent they are, whereas the Broncos are surprising in how consistent they are, because I wouldn't call the Broncos a good team. I think the Broncos are just a more consistent team and they're making more out of teams that aren't playing as consistently themselves. Like I can't think of like an amazing Broncos performance that we've seen. There's been no standout game where you've looked and thought, oh, that's Albert O, that's Tim Patrick, that's Teddy Bridgewater shaking everything off and proving they are a specific elite level player in this league. But everybody has performed when they've needed them to perform. Whereas when you talk about the Chiefs, you're talking about absolute elite tier players not doing that at all. Like Travis Kelce's not been anything good. Patrick Mahomes has been wildly inconsistent. We haven't seen a lot from Tyreek Hill or anything like that. And this Sunday night football game feels an awful lot like this is the moment where the division could potentially be decided, because the Chargers are very up and down. The Raiders are very up and down. And it's looking for just someone to kind of just grab the bull by the horns. And, it could be the Broncos that come out of this all of a sudden as unexpected division winners, but it could just as easily be the Chiefs.
I like the point about the division. I mean, I think the Broncos, you said the Broncos haven't had that splashy performance yet. They had the Cowboys, which I know the Cowboys kind of fell apart, but I think they had that performance, which I liked, but they are solid. I mean, they come and compete every weekend. I think they've got enough organization on defense to mean that they can win games without having to do huge amounts on the offensive side of the ball. But I mean, if that's the Broncos, my point really would be more around the Kansas City Chiefs, that yes, they've been inconsistent, and yes, we've been pretty hard on them. I think most people have. When you think of expectations going into this season, having been to back-to-back Super Bowls, they're still 7-4. I mean, they're still, keeping pace with a lot of the big NFL superpowers. To be fair, I mean the complaints that we could have maybe against the Chiefs, you could possibly start to hold against teams like the Rams. I mean, I know the Titans is a slightly different case because they've had some really big injuries. But yeah, it does look like the only team that seem to be, cooking on gas, seem to have their mojo in the AFC at the moment is probably the Patriots. For everybody else, there is that element of week to week. Your point on Tyreek Hill and Travis Kelce, I think, is sound, though. Players who we are used to winning games, in big games, you expect big moments from big players. And, they've put points up against a couple of teams this season. The Chiefs, I mean, I really thought they'd started to steady the ship when they put 30 plus points up against the Eagles. But yeah, you do look at them and think, for as much as they could still win this division, still probably favourites, they're a game up to win the division. You don't necessarily think they're striking fear into the rest of the AFC when it comes to the playoffs the way they would in years gone by. So yeah, your Chiefs point's valid. Who knows with the Broncos? I'd have counted them out at the start of the season, but even without Von Miller, they still look solid and, ready to play. Enough good players, maybe minus a couple of great players, to think they could do something really special in the postseason.
It's an interesting tie, this one, because if the Broncos can beat the Chiefs, and if the Raiders and Chargers can both get wins, then at the end of week 13, we'll be at a state where all four teams in the AFC West have exactly the same record, 7-5, which I think would be fascinating to see where we go from there. But on your point about who the hottest team in the AFC is, and talking about nobody really but the Patriots, I think we've got three teams in the AFC that are hot at the moment. The Patriots are on a 6-game winning streak. The Dolphins are on a 4-game winning streak. And the Kansas City Chiefs are on a 4-game winning streak. And I think you forget that maybe because they've been so patchy and so hit and miss, and they're coming off the bye week. But they have won 4 games in a row. So are they more like the Chiefs? I mean, they got a few more big plays from Kelce and Hill over the last couple of games, which they weren't getting kind of earlier in the season. The D wasn't getting carved up so much. Sorensen was pretty much giving away touchdowns every week to start the season. And I don't know if that's been the case so much over the last couple of games. So I think they're more like their normal selves. The Broncos, for me, are just a little bit too hit and miss. I don't think there's anything special on offense. I think they need the other team to play badly to get the win. None of us expected them to beat the Chargers last week. We all picked the Chargers. Lo and behold, they scrapped their way to the win. For me, I'd love it. I would love it if the Broncos won and everybody could get to the same record, because those last kind of 4 or 5 weeks of the season would be absolutely brilliant. But for me, I can't see anything but a Chiefs win. And I think they're going to comfortably end up winning that division, when earlier in the season, it looked like they could end up bottom of the division.
Just having flashbacks to the last time someone I liked talked on a sport-related radio about how much they'd love it if something happened, and just having really, really bad feelings and about how this weekend's going to go. But I think Phil's got a lot of interesting points there, and I think he is right. If at the end of this weekend we're looking at a division that's got everybody at 7-5, you've got to look at that and thinking, well, it's not necessarily who's bad and it's not necessarily who's good. It's just who wants it. I think it's going to be fascinating.
My quick point, I'm only probably just stirring a pot. I get the point about the Broncos and the Broncos not being stellar, but I mean, they've just paid 2 wide receivers reasonable money. So they obviously think at wide receiver, I like them at tight end. I think they're reasonable at running back. I think quarterback, I like Teddy Bridgewater, but ultimately of the 4 quarterbacks in that division, you'd probably have him 4th of the 4. But I would say this about the Broncos. You've just said, Phil, that the Dolphins are one of the hot teams in the AFC on a 4-game winning streak. Broncos are a better team than the Dolphins for me. I think the Dolphins have been helped a little by schedule, and actually they have improved. There's no doubt. And Tua's interview at the weekend, post-game interview, where he said, there's belief in the locker room and nobody really cares about what's going on outside, is is a kind of narrative I love, and I really like that kind of band of brothers feel when you get these teams late in the season who start making these runs. But still, I think player for player, man for man, if I was to be given the opportunity to coach one of those teams down the stretch, or if I had to put my house on who might find their way into the playoffs, I still probably have the Broncos ahead there. That said, I mean, we're talking about splitting the division. Obviously, this year with that extra wildcard place, certainly conceivable that 3 out of those 4 teams in that division could find themselves in the playoffs. And, for as much as divisional winner, means you can print a T-shirt and sell some merchandise, with only one team getting the bye now in a close division like that, you've got to say it might not even matter who wins the division as such. If you're in it, you've got a chance to win it, I suppose, when it comes to playoff football. But yeah, I think the Broncos are pretty good. Like the Raiders are pretty good. They were on a 3-game losing streak, weren't they, till the weekend? And do you know what? I'm with you. I think it could be the most interesting division to watch as it unfolds. But all this just throws me back to you, JB. So you have picked this as your game of the week. Tell us what you think the difference will be between the teams, and usher one of these into Club Dub.
This was the most difficult game for me to pick, and I have since changed my mind from when I first made my picks earlier on, in a part to kind of separate some of us who had all made the same picks. But this week I am ushering Teddy Two Gloves and the Denver Broncos into Club Dub.
Well, I absolutely didn't expect that. I liked the jibber-jabber we had that I thought was just making it interesting, just keeping listeners on the edge of their seat. But you've only gone and done it. You've only gone and picked the Denver Broncos. I mean, I don't have the... Is it at Mile High, or are they going to Arrowhead?
They are going to Arrowhead.
That's not a sound decision for me. Well, I will be watching with you on Sunday intently, and let's hope it works out for you. But the Denver Broncos in Club Dub, wow. Nothing if not controversial, JB. Personally, I love it. And PB, you get to follow that. So are we going to be on a run of controversial picks? Give us your tie of the week and tell us what's going to separate the best from the rest.
For me, I disagree with James about which was the hardest tie to pick, and also which is going to be the game of the week, because for me, I think it's a fascinating contest between the Chargers and the Bengals. And, it was only a couple of weeks ago where the Bengals were absolutely storming the division. They were 6-1. At the end of 7 games, and you think, wow, this Bengals team has really got it together, and they're coming on strong. And now they're 7-4. I think they were 5-1 actually. Sorry, I forgive me. Now they're 7-4, and it's odd. They almost completely went off the boil. In losses to, they lost to the Jets, they lost to the Browns. Real odd games that you probably wouldn't expect them to pick when they are at 5-1. So. For me, they've bounced back a little bit with a 2-game win streak now. Obviously, sorry, James, they beat the Steelers, smashed the Steelers at the weekend.
I was just going to say, I don't think beat them really encompasses what happened there.
I think Big Ben retired mid-game, didn't he? And then they beat the Raiders, obviously, the week before, who then beat the Cowboys this week. It's a very, very, I think every week we say this is a strange season, isn't it? But the Bengals look like they've got it together. And if you look at the AFC standings, they're a game back from the Ravens. They're 2 games ahead of the Steelers. So they're kind of putting themselves in a strong position. They'd be in that mix. We've just been talking about the AFC West, all potentially being at the same record. The Bengals would be about the same as well. If they're in that division, they're level with the Chiefs, kind of would be at the top of that division. So they're in a strong position looking at the playoffs. And I really think they're an exciting team to watch this year. Mixon's running well. They've got a real good receiving threat in Boyd, Higgins. Jamar Chase obviously has lit it up as a rookie. I think they're a young, exciting team. And I think when we look back to the start of the season, I don't think any of them really penned them as having as good a team as they do. On the other side of the coin, you've got the Chargers, and we picked the Chargers, I think, early doors as a potential division contender, and they are, because we've just talked about how close that division is. But they're just so inconsistent. They're so hit and miss. They lost to the Broncos at the weekend, and again, as I said earlier, none of us picked that. They beat the Steelers in a close game the week before. They lost to the Vikings the week before that. They beat the Eagles the week before that. They lost to the Patriots, the Ravens. Before that, they were on a 3-game winning streak. It's so up and down. You can't pick week to week which charges are going to turn up. They seem to do a good enough job of putting points on the board. I think the lowest points they've put on the board so far over the last kind of 5 or 6 weeks is 27 against both 20 against the Vikings they put up, and 13 against the Broncos this week was poor. But other than that, 41 points on the Steelers, 24 points in a loss to the Patriots, 27 points against the Eagles. They only put 6 on the board against the Ravens. So that kind of shows a little bit of the inconsistency that they've got. They've got the potential there. They've got the playmakers, Keenan Allen, Mike Williams, Austin Eckler, to put points up. Justin Herbert is arguably the best quarterback from his quarterback class last year. But they're just not doing it on a consistent basis. And the defense aren't getting the takeaways that they need to get every week as well. So I think this is a real pick 'em game. You could ask me now, ask me tomorrow, and then ask me again on Sunday morning, and I might give you 3 different answers, keep changing my mind as to who's going to win the game. I think it's going to be a fascinating contest.
I think there's a number of things that you've mentioned that I want to pick out. Firstly, you said, Herbert, the best quarterback of that class. Well, last year, I think he definitely was, but Burrow was part of that class as well, wasn't he? So, I wasn't huge on Burrow after what I saw last season. I saw a rookie kind of finding his way. I wasn't absolutely burying the guy either, but I hadn't really seen, anything to get too excited about. And then I thought, coming off the back of really a catastrophic injury, even for a young player, he has been brilliant this season. And I think when you talk about inconsistency, you kind of nailed it there, Phil. For as much as very few teams really in the NFL have been consistent this season, these two teams have been inconsistent for very different reasons. I think the Bengals, you nailed it when you said young players. I think these are still young players learning, finding their way, when they find themselves in a deficit like they have done against some lesser opponents, and they've kind of struggled to find their way back. You hope that's just them building that level of experience, that level of know-how of what you need to do in those tight, close games. But in certain games where they've got up ahead of steam, they have just not looked back. They have a kind of fearless nature about them once they get in front, where they absolutely go for those big plays. And I think Mixon is a top 3 running back this season in the NFL. Admittedly, a season where we haven't seen much of Henry, and sadly, it looks like we're not going to see much of Christian McCaffrey either with his season over. So, Mixon for me is a top 3 running back. Chase, for all of the concerns they had about his transition to the NFL, for as much as it's not been perfect, I think it's been very good. I don't necessarily think that I am buying into all these concerns they had about hands and route running coming out of college. I think he looks like a bona fide superstar. And it just seems like on defense, they've got an identity, they've got a will, and they're really playing hard. And the things I like at the moment is that exuberance and that swagger the Bengals have. You hear them talking about, that's last season's Bengals. We're a better team now, we're the kind of team that, can go on to dominate for years. And look, I think that's a long way off. I think you only have to look at the hype that we felt for the Chargers and the Dolphins coming into this season to know that one season's success doesn't automatically carry into another. But yeah, the Bengals, I think, are great. I think the Chargers, being a lot quicker here, just still trying to get their head around how to play. They don't seem as adventurous or as high risk or even as high octane an offense. But equally, on their day, they can absolutely stack up very well against the best the NFL has to offer. So, do you know what? It is a tough game to pick. But I think off the back of last weekend's performances, if that was your entire frame of reference, I think you'd have to say that the Bengals are going in this week full of confidence.
Yeah, let's talk about last week a little bit then from the Bengals' point of view, because it was an absolute dominating performance. At times, I do think a lot of it was more about the absolutely abysmal defensive play of the Steelers. Like some of those Joe Mixon runs where he was just running past very weak arm tackles and people that just didn't seem to want to make the effort in, which is so painful for me to say as a Steelers fan. But ultimately, you have to beat the team that's put in front of you. And the Bengals did absolutely more than that to do it. Was thinking about this point last week. I can't remember what it was we were talking about, but thinking of there. One of the things that we often talk about, and one of the things that NFL pundits talk about, is how good it is to have a reliable tight end for a rookie or a new quarterback. It gives them that kind of safety valve. And I think the Bengals went and did the one thing even better than that. And they went and got the wide receiver from that quarterback's college career, because you've already spent the 2 seasons that Lamar Chase and Joe Burrow spent at LSU together was building that connection that you see guys like Travis Kelce and Patrick Mahomes have, like you've seen Tom Brady talk about with Julian Edelman. It's that just insight of, I know where I can put the ball for this guy to go and get it. And that has absolutely carried over.
Away from Edelman. You just look at the Buccaneers this season with Gronk out injured. The offense didn't click. Put him back in the game. He was all right against the Giants, and then look at the Colts, and he had 100 and something yards, I think. Yeah, and he was the option when Brady didn't know where to go, when the offense was misfiring first half. He knew to go there, and I think you're right on that point about Burrow and Chase. To come to this game specifically now, I think we're talking about a tale of 2 second seasons. I was definitely the high man, I think, on this podcast of Joe Burrow last year. I thought there was an awful lot of promise there. And I think he showed quite well in a Bengals team that was very poorly set up for what they were trying to do. And I think the injury robbed us of potentially what he could see. Whereas Justin Herbert was so much better than anybody expected him to be. Flip it to this year, Burrow has come in and is kind of performing to the same kind of standard that Herbert was last year, whereas Herbert has regressed to kind of having a rookie's second season. And there's nothing wrong with that. I think it's a sign of the burden of expectations that Herbert was under based on how well he did last season. And for anybody, I would love to have a quarterback playing like him for the Steelers. Again, with all due respect to 2-time Super Bowl winning and Hall of Fame bound quarterback Ben Roethlisberger. It's all about the teams between the two of them. I think it's doing what they do. I think the Bengals have that identity in terms of hit them with the run, hit them with the run, hit them with the run. Okay, now they're paying attention to the run, bomb to Lamar Chase. Or something like that. And ultimately, they're going to keep doing that until someone stops them. Whereas I think the Chargers are struggling with that. I think they're doing well to get Austin Eckler involved in the game, but I don't think he brings the same dimension that someone like Joe Mixon does. And because Herbert has potentially struggled a bit, you haven't seen those great connections with guys like Keenan Allen and Mike Williams really show itself like it did when the Chargers were looking dominant at the beginning of the season.
A couple of quick, not that I want to make excuses for Justin Herbert. So, firstly, I think Herbert's had a pretty good year. I think regression, he's still top 10 in the NFL for me. I still put him in that kind of bracket, even with this year's performances. But also we're talking about a quarterback who's on to his second offensive coordinator and under a defensive head coach. And I think they'll work that out. But I think maybe that's, how would I describe it? Maybe that dynamic is just going to take that little bit longer. But certainly I don't think you have to necessarily compare one against another, although being from the same class, it's probably natural people will. I think Burrow's having a great second season. I think Herbert has established himself as a great QB. But yeah, it's one of those, isn't it? The Chargers probably slightly underachieving, the Bengals definitely overachieving, and it just changes the whole way people feel about fixtures like this, I guess. So PB, we've danced around it. But you are left with the difficult decision, you're telling us. Game of the week, hardest one to pick. Put us out of our misery. Who's in Club Dub?
So if you go on current form in terms of the streak, you'd pick the Bengals. If you go on win-loss, 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 you'd pick the Chargers. For me, I am going to go against the three of you according to our little sheet, and I am going to put the Chargers into Club Dub this week. They're going to pick up the W over the Bengals.
Wow! It is the week of shocks, according to our pod. For those of you interested in what Phil refers to when he refers to our little sheet, well, you can follow us on social and see our picks for all of the games of the week across the Twitter sphere. You can hit us up on Insta and pretty much everywhere else. Remember, you can also email us, clubdubpodcast@mail.com. So 2 down means 1 to go, and it's over to me, and this is a season's first. For the first time in the 2021 regular season, the game of the week that I'm going to talk about includes the Arizona Cardinals. So let's make this happen. So as a lifelong Cardinals fan, since the late 1980s, I have followed the Cardinals through what could be described as thin and thinner. I think they are still historically the worst team in the history of the NFL when you stack up wins and losses, but not this year. And the more I try and hold back my enthusiasm and excitement, the more it might just end up seeping out, because I've been playing it quite cool this year, thinking, you know what? The Cardinals are okay. They're still flawed. You know, Kyler Murray isn't always the fastest starting. Sometimes we find ourselves down. We put ourselves in difficult situations against poor teams and we don't always get out of them. I mean, the Panthers game is probably the example you think of there. But do you know what? Something has changed my mind and changed my opinion of the trajectory of this season. And it's thanks to my lovely friends on the Arizona Cardinals UK fans Facebook page, who put up a question this week. Yeah, I mean, a very well-deserved plug for the wonderful people who do a great job with the content on that particular Facebook page. But they put up a survey this week on which team do you think is better, the 2015 team that famously, you know, beat all comers that year until we lost Carson Palmer to injury. I mean, ultimately, you look at 2015, you maybe even look at the team that made the Super Bowl under Kurt Warner, and you look at this team, and I honestly think man for man, player for player, yeah, there are a few you might swap in and swap out, but overall this roster is probably the most talented the Cardinals have certainly had in my time following the team. Yes, JJ Watt's out, and he's not the only one. We've got a couple of pretty significant injuries. But even then, you look at what's left. You look at Chandler Jones. You look at the junkyard dog, Junk Marcus Golden. You know, they have so many big name players or players who are really turning into star players on the offensive and defensive side of the ball. I think they really are serious contenders now. AJ Green having a better season than I think we could have ever hoped for in Cardinal Red, coming back from a couple of years where you might have wondered if there was still the appetite after the run of injuries he'd had. But do you know what? If things go well from here on out, I can see the Cardinals being in with a real chance. And I mean, they're up against some heavyweights in the NFC. You know, the Bucks, the Rams, I think will absolutely sort themselves out. And they're not alone, are they? There are a number of teams who can put on a show and probably consider themselves man for man equal to the Cardinals of Arizona. But I've picked them this week because I think this is a litmus test, really, against the Chicago Bears team that, look, I've, you know, just mentioned how long I've been a fan of the NFL. You know, I loved watching in the 80s, you know, those great defenses, the 85 defense and the Bad News Bears. And you know, they've always had a kind of place in my heart ever since. But without wanting to speak ill of them, this year they are not a great football team. I mean, what we saw on Thanksgiving against the Lions, I mean, was pretty woeful. I mean, there seemed very little plan and direction. You know, they were really just helped by Andy Dalton, you know, being able to think on his feet a couple of times and make a couple of big plays that ended up being the difference. But they are the type of, I don't know, poor team, challenge team, limited team that in years gone by when the Cardinals got up ahead of steam, they would trip and fall against this kind of opposition. Now, the Bears come off a long week having played on Thanksgiving. The Cardinals come off a really good break having had their bye. Both of these teams should be well prepared, but I think the Cardinals really need to make a statement really need to go out and start quick on offense and not play to their opponent, not be hesitant, not be fearful of what could happen. Go out there and absolutely try and make a statement against a team that's there for the taking. And hopefully this will just be the catalyst post the bye that leads us to great things. On the Bears side of the ball, I mean, I've already mentioned Andy Dalton, and I think Dalton having some good play time this year is great for him. I think the Red Rifle is a really likable NFL personality and has been a great quarterback, actually. He's actually gone on to have a really, really good NFL career. I do think, though, any talk about developing Fields is pretty limited and pretty light, as I think he will have a new head coach and a new offensive coordinator come 2022. But look, here's the thing. If the Bears can start well against a Cardinals team that don't, they have a chance. If the Cardinals turn up, if the Cardinals have that energy and that spark we've seen a couple of times this season, it's a game that truly should be out of sight.
The Bears suck. Not really a whole lot more I think I can add to that. The Bears aren't making the playoffs. They had a good start. Weren't they like 3-0 or 3-1 or something, and then just went on their horrendous losing streak? They're not a good team. If you look at the Lions, as you mentioned on Thanksgiving, I think the Lions could have beaten them really. If the Lions that turned up then that had played against the 49ers and the Ravens and some of those other big games, I think the Lions would have won that game. I don't think the Bears are any good. They're held up by their D, really. I like Andy Dalton. He's all right, but it's just, is Allen Robinson even playing this year? He wanted the big contract and all that stuff. Yeah. They franchise tagged him. I can't remember one highlight reel play I've seen him make this year, and you need your big players to step up, if you're going to make a run at things. So for me, the Bears are poor. And this is going to be a walkover win for the Cardinals, you'd expect. And you talk about the Cardinals being one of the contenders. I think the Cardinals are in the box seat for the first seed. They've won 9 games. The Packers have won 9 games, but the Packers have played the extra one and got a loss as well. The Cardinals are 9-2 versus the Packers at 9-3. The Bucs are 8-3, so they're a game back of the Cardinals as well. If you look at the Cardinals' schedule, after the Bears, they play the Rams. And the Rams are a little bit hit and miss. We're aware of my controversial opinion that if the Rams don't make the playoffs, McVay could be on the hot seat. So they're going to be, we'll see what happens there. The Lions, that's going to be an easy win for the Cardinals. And then they've maybe got a couple of tough games in the Colts, who are going to be in the playoff hunt, and the Cowboys. So they're not, guaranteed 100% they're going to be the first seed. But the way they've been playing, you've got to think they're probably, the favourite, albeit having said that, they lost to the Packers, which is a 50-50 game, and then they got absolutely trashed by the Panthers. So they've got a ricket in them as well to kind of lose a poor one. But yeah, for me, the Bears are so bad. I just think this is going to be a walk-off. I think Cardinals could be up by 2 or 3 scores by half time.
Rob, cue up the bread advert music, because we're going to talk about old teams. Or more specifically, the stories that we hear about old teams. One of the things if you have been lucky enough to watch all of the old America's Game documentaries that NFL Network produces on the Super Bowl wins, there is kind of every 3rd or 4th tale includes some form of starting quarterback is injured or starting quarterback is knocked out of a game, backup quarterback has to come in and play for a certain amount of games. And the teams that win are the teams who bring their backup quarterback into the game, and that backup quarterback continues to perform and continues to lead the team to victory. We are talking about 2 teams here who have both had to play their backup quarterback. The Bears are still playing their backup quarterback. In relief, I think Colt McCoy went 2-1, which is, I think, pretty good. Colt McCoy is known as being a backup quarterback, but not known as particularly being a successful one, the kind of you would associate with like a Case Keenum or something like that. Andy Dalton is a very good quarterback on his day, but is also regarded by a lot of fans as kind of the average line for NFL quarterbacks. He will win you some games, but he won't win you all of the games. He is kind of the bare minimum that you would want from your starting quarterback. And I think it's a fascinating game to watch. We've talked about trap games before as well. Like I know it's something I think I've commented on before that the Steelers suffer an awful lot from is playing down to an opposition and suffering because of it. And I don't see this as a trap game. I wouldn't put it as plainly as Phil opened his what I'm sure will eventually be regarded as award-winning analysis of the Chicago Bears there. But it is kind of a fair statement to make. I think this is something that with, you know, the coming off the bye week, you've got Kyler Murray back in play, and you've got that opportunity for the Cardinals to really show what they're capable of doing and continue that kind of run that you, Rob, as a Cardinals fan, have got to be absolutely loving. And I think it's telling by the fact that you seem happy to talk about the Cardinals now, when previously, every time we have mentioned how successful the Cardinals are off pod, Rob has downplayed that and pointed out all of the problems with the Cardinals season. The tide is turning, ladies, gentlemen, and non-binary listeners, if you're out there. Just to talk a little bit about the Bears. They're not very good. This feels like a coaching staff and a team setup that is, if you will forgive the lingo, circling the drain. They are just getting to the end of the season before we have wholesale changes yet again in Chicago, and we have someone else come in and see what they can do. I think they've got good prospects, and they've still got Allen Robinson, and Allen Robinson is still a really good wide receiver. I think Justin Fields has looked more and more impressive as the weeks have gone on, and definitely looks like they made the right choice there and going to get him. The important thing is now setting him up for success and giving him a way forward to win. But I don't think that's going to be this year.
Such an odd one, isn't it? Because I mean, the Bears made the playoffs last season, but even then, kind of this season seemed inevitable, didn't it? You know, when they kept with that coaching staff for another year. And I mean, look, this is a guy who's won Coach of the Year. I mean, I wouldn't have a clue how to coach an NFL franchise. I don't want to be too hard on the Bears, but it does feel like the right decision could have been made last year, and it could have given the Bears fan base a little bit more to cheer about. But yeah, you are right. I mean, you say the tide is turning. That tide is the tide of the Red Sea. I've never quite understood that, a bird and sea. It doesn't quite seem like they're matching up their kind of team name and sea. Anyway, yeah. But you know what, as a member of the Red Sea and thinking that, you know, we've got to remember Cliff Kingsbury never had a winning record, I don't believe, as a college head coach. And Vance Joseph said something this week that he said being around Cliff is great because you see a man who's enjoying really that feeling that he's building something special, you know, and he's got one of those special football teams. And you know what? I think Vance Joseph, for as much as we were talking about people who, you know, have surprised this season, Vance Joseph's defense has been one of them. Yeah, I know we brought in some great talent with JJ Watt, but, you know, we also let Patrick Peterson go and a number of others that, you know, Cardinals fans wanted to see stick around, like Hassan Riddick and so on and so forth. But what he's done with that defense, I think, is great. Do you know what? Yeah, I really, I'm not going to beat about the bush here. It gives me nothing but pride to say that I have absolutely no doubt. There is no pause before making this decision, because the team I am going to celebrate and put into Club Dub this week is, of course, the Arizona Cardinals.
When the Bears feed the Cardinals their lunch and we have to grovel back.
Well, do you know what? All of those things are possible on any given Sunday. And I mean, the Panthers are kind of a bit of a bogey team for the Cardinals in truth, but I mean, it's all possible, isn't it? I hope we play well. I hope we remain injury free. For as well as Colt McCoy's done, you've got to imagine Kyler Murray is the key to a really deep playoff run. But yeah, what a brilliant team. You know, AJ Green and some of these veterans and players they've brought in have just been absolutely astounding. They've really gelled and really performed. So, yeah, a time to be proud as a Cardinals fan and one I intend to enjoy. But gentlemen, with no Aldrin, we've absolutely whipped through that. 3 games, 3 interesting picks.
I would add,
go on.
Sorry to interrupt. I would add, because Aldrin has sent his note from afar that his game of the week was going to be the 49ers versus Seahawks. So for all our listeners, you can rejoice that he's not in the country and you don't have to hear about that trash game.
Crikey. I mean, that is going to be... I mean, if the Cardinals are obvious winners over the Bears, I can only imagine that if Aldrin were not here and absent, he would be picking the 49ers, right? You know, one of the things that came up in our recap show was I actually think the 49ers are, you know, steadily building up ahead of steam. You know, they're a dangerous football team. So, yeah, the Seahawks do feel a bit lost, don't they? But again, any given Sunday, who knows? Maybe the narrative will flip on its head. But gents, it was stunning work. I can't wait to get round to Sunday's games and enjoy them in your company. And for all of those out there in Listenerland, with our new two-show format, you can pick up our recap show next Tuesday evening with our Pick 'em Pod going live for you guys to listen to on the Thursday. Gentlemen, it was stunning work. Let's do it all again in a few days' time.
Thanks, Rob.
Thanks a lot.
This is amazing.
Remember to subscribe and be cool. Tell your friends.
The game